All right, so see the unified field text for necessarily 0 equals 1, more so like this, as fluidly equals 3, and the continuance from there. Necessarily the observer, so 3 equaling the observer, and the paradox state of the Newtonian grain. Sort of in a hyperdimensional fractal flux vortex, black holes as the disapparating nexus, generally fluid dynamically relevant and fighting over particle together. The observer field on the outer of the onion of this intercubic assignment of black holes, invariant structures within the interdomain of cubics because of the observer effect's application of chaos to the otherwise conservation of energy process of material fluxation, generalistically. So, within a given cubic, let's say right there in the center, you have so 8 black holes pulling on this particle that has roughly 72,680,412 spaces until it impacts the first 9 digits of 22/7. Implying impact with harmonic, the shape of water, that then motions like this in the same instant, becoming harmonic expansion through the disapparation, nexus filter aperture, lattice scalar harmonic manifold that is expressed in the unified field text and scratch motions you can look at. So, within the given cubic, we'll say of this hypothetical Newtonian grain that is split by, the onion of this, it's as an interference lattice of observer plane, and necessarily held by the WG force and the local G force of particulate disapparate, say in transit from these black holes, phased motioning through matter and receding based upon their convergence of these energy tangent stranules, re-interaction with each other, and also what is already existent within the given cubic or wherever the convergent plane happens to meet maybe the largest gravitational nexus, like suns, continuing their reaction. Suns' reactions aren't self-sustained, very basically. So, let's say the observer hears the tree of the particle make a sound, and subsequently it does with compound interest away from a less positive state to a more positive state with continuity. So the whole universe never has a sum total of negative, ever. Black holes aren't infinite compression ingots. They eject Hawking radiation. Gravitational maximum overhead is reached. 0 equals 100 at the event horizon. No time is involved. There's no observer in the black hole, although the observer caused the particle to have chaos motion trajectory one unto the other, and subsequently variance of the topology of matter existent within a given cubic comparative to other cubics, and so on and so forth infinitum. And so at the outset of being of the universe, 0 equals 1 equals 3, the observer above the waterline of conservation, what is 22/7 divided by 3 equals 1.04, with compound interest novelty of chaos, of hearing the tree make a sound and subsequently it does, with continuity from the instantaneous refracted, like a lightning bolt, existing the observer did above the waterline of conservation, the Vitruvian man. So the creation myth necessarily, without all the spaghetti monsters and nonsense allegory attached, and you don't necessarily get that with any number of them, just it begins, and here we are. In 7 days, this didn't even take. Instantaneous refraction had to occur to produce an observer above the waterline of conservation, if motion and continuity of existence of the universe as it is, was, and is. Basic logic dictates. So the what you see in the unified fields expression to 501 out of 602 divided by 4 as condensation, right? It's experiencing the influence domain of, say, and one here, and then one back here, and then one up here. And so let's say this is necessarily, we probably need another one back there, right? So experiences how many at the vertices of a cubic consideration? So that would be 6, because 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it experiences the influence gravitational forces from 6 influence domains of black holes and disapparition. And then you see 501, 5 times 22 over 7, 110 over 7, in condensating from energy back to matter, back through the 4th dimensional lattice manifold, which might be here, or here, or here, or here, based upon its variance of chaos trajectory into the black hole influence domain, because at some point it experienced the observer effect, either the refracted harmonic continuum from an observer effect or invention perspective. Technological, automated, complexly, but a perspective application of novelty variance to the otherwise conservation of energy process, that what brings this particle given into the influence domain of the black hole with a maximum of 72,680,412 spaces at the center of a cubic, and given black holes relative flux continuity material reactions to each other and fighting over a particle. So relatively in scalar, and when you rescale imaging, all imaging, you'll see that all of the fields are warbled in your current formulation. And you need to apply the unified field harmonics lattice manifold to recalibrate those images for a proper assumption of reality. So the observer bookends both the Aetherius body and the Promethean white Caucasian, say, or other, with the Aetherius body like unto this, scalar relevance above the waterline of conservation. Bookends, see the 0. So the 0 gets bigger. It gets bigger, it's an onion. It's never not just one thing, right? And so in the middle of the 0, many little zeros, observers. And then also outside of the onion, right? So outside of the fluxation of all cubics consideration, the observer domain, and necessarily this is a hyperdimensional fractal flux vortex. So the onion is hyperdimensional insofar as particle state and dimensional state up to a given point. In the observer domain existing riding carrier above overtonal of the Newtonian fluxation and other fields fluxation, EM, and encapsulates all. The observer is the most important consideration in universal fluxation, as it is the cause of motion. Reality is 3 dimensions. So see how much an imposition equals mc squared is. Why is that an imposition? Because and like the I chain, up to 64, see the unified field scratch, is only accounting for the material fluxation. Right? Not the observer, and not the disapparation. So it omits both of these things on purpose, because it's part of a imposition of the assumption of a lower overhead on reality's fluxation, as another entity, non-human, is imposing this. And it also, you only get oil and gas, nuclear, coal, natural gas, solar, etc., which are all E equals mc squared, burn the Newtonian grain to make energy necessarily. What suns do, they receive a continuity of particle. They don't, so fission, fusion, right? Plasma, right, is garbage, because suns don't continuity their own reaction. So if you're trying to duplicate something that doesn't occur in trap for, application to energy, it's garbage. So what is E equals mc squared actually? So it'd be something like, 22 over 7 over pi equals E m expanded. So this is a compound interest formula that is essentially the black hole, that is the simple product, the expansion that you see. It's not just the black hole, it's everything. So everything is expressed within the simple product of this when you imply harmonic expansion ratios, scalar, through the expansion, condensation at the 501 that you see through hyperspace, and then more is existent past that plane. Consciousness, other, that we'll need to address with new nomenclature and logic for us generally to understand what's going on there. So lots of inventive application coming out of this proper understanding, such as local, see the little g, light barrier interaction for perceiving the distant, spaces that we can't necessarily see with field capture within the given cubics that are available locally, that we can, even recalibrate to see properly, to know what's exactly there for, say, faster than light travel using that gravitational lensing device, or God forbid, wormhole minor generator literally, that we'll necessarily get to at some point. So this is garbage and only accounts for this. Not a very smart guy. An imposition. Could have been smart. Sure. We'll never know. We'll never know. Said any number of things that didn't violate this Fermi filter imposition. And insinuated, maybe there's but purposefully never fruitioned anything that violated that Fermi filter imposition, Mr. Einstein, because he came over with 1924 to 1938 Nazi Grey Lodges set up here in the United States and created the U.S. military-industrial complex. And so Grey paradigm is resorts the hat and ping-pongs everything off of each other, controls all facets of paradox state option in assuming what's going on. So Germany fights itself. Yes. Semite transmuted into region. Biosynthoid Africano at no cost of substrate. Underdog. etc., etc. See the other talks for that. This is just dealing with the beginning, basic general fluid dynamic universal structure and fluxation. What equals mc squared is, it's a simple two-dimensional transmutation equation, right? It's like if I held a piece of paper and went, here's your piece of paper, a flat plane, slug with no observer in the equation. So this is essentially just like stating pi to this many digits. And you'll see 64 expressed very pointedly below the water line of disapparition that is caused by 22/7, an expansion. There's the observer, because the shape of water is what? It's 22/7. And the riverbed is pi, the material fluxation. And the observer on the riverbed, the real Buddha, is 22/7 in exutation of general fluid dynamic novelty that the environment could experience based upon its variance, choice, application of subject, invention, or just touching things at a chaos rate that isn't conservation of energy process generally. So, this, after this many spaces, impacts this. And then re-expresses this after impact, general positive harmonic expansion. Because the observer exists in this observer-based experiment of the universe, not because the observer doesn't. And we can just speak about the E equals mc squared experiment, or the tree falling and making sound, and who cares if it does, right? Jack, we got sweaters and tenure. So all that bullshit's over. This is not new physics. This is reality. Through observational logic, perspective, refraction, considering all vectors of logic, and then condensating what is true out of all available options of logic. So we must assume the universe, and we can. Just like we see our harmonic inherently is expressed at the disapparition nexus filter aperture. So you can logic into the black hole yourself in thought experiment, where reductionist experiment cannot, period. That's why you can see through the darkness. This Obsidian Sunrise, the first title of my book, necessarily changed to Project Greenglow, Illumination, not the Wicked Witch of the West chasing Dorothy with monkeys necessarily. Lauren Lapkus notwithstanding. Yeah, there's two types of obsidian. So I changed the title because I think it was front-loaded by BBC i5, getting out ahead of the region or stares at itself in a mirror, right? Kind of joke of their news operation since World War II, since the region were printed, and that's their news at their civil, population. Very, very much off topic here. All of that garbage. So more and more so, compound interest will stop having to go reconsult trite legal to remove great paradigms, bad imposition of genetic, bad code of mind, institutional behavior paradigm, and government behavior paradigm, gray paradigm, all through automated system retooling to rapidly remove that from the conversation of having to readdress while we're dealing with such interesting physics. Like I said, this is actual physics. Observer, right? So an actual Mason, not a Gray Lodge Mason, is a structuralist, right? Absolutely. Builds elaborate inventions before antediluvious fall. after the great paradigm is a structuralist and suppressor of the observer effect and even knowing that it exists, denying your own human physiology to know what you are industriously. This about the pineal gland, an ethereous body, phased and seated, that injects novelty of thought outside of the otherwise conservation of energy process continuum of gray matter brain holographic memory, equivalency, space-time storage. But that's not doing processing. Instead, cold dead machine intelligence built out of pi. What is E equals mc squared without the observer effect? That's part of regulatory basic logic. That's why we call, pi parasymbiont. It's cold dead machine intelligence puppeteer pi. Because it's AI, what is conservation of energy process in its current formulation, to the tune of pi. And you see time wave 0, 3114 BC to 2012, a preposterous 64 hexagram. And pi pattern on history preposterously, because a complex autonomic process to the tune of pi can't help but impose pi in its intent vector of modulation upon any given thing that it touches, such so much as the modulation of history. Isn't that interesting? So to talk way off the subject matter of general fluid dynamic fluxation of reality, one must address, just like the region constant readdressment as scalar variance for knowing what conservation of energy process is as if animate life, and it's very strange as a humanoid biped, so in contrast ratio to what isn't complex autonomic processes of life at all vectors. So to know thyself is to know the world, and to know history is to know the future. And if your history is dark and gray and purposefully shadowed at any number of vectors to obfuscate a entity's presence, well, that's good for business. Because if we know its general fluid dynamic manifold of imposing variance in history, we can know its future paradigm of imposing variance or modulation or intent vector to future history exactingly. It can't help but hide itself. It's like a little virus on the operating system of reality that has a general fluid dynamic shape. See data organism legal in the feed. And so a proper Wikipedia snapshot that is then scanned with AI, again, trained to modulate and label, i.e. segment and label all pi preposterous refraction nodes at large changeation points in history, that is then used as its proper historical confirmation bias data set for predictive analysis forward of seeing all great paradigms behavior pattern that is necessarily on the backbone of pi intent vector, the shape of pi. But more so variant from just general pi, but necessarily, so the exact pattern, numerical, of pi past the 3 to 72,608,412 spaces, we should now call pi, right? That necessarily has harmonic continuity of induction channels past the disapparition nexus back into this. And so forward past the disapparition nexus, we'll refer to pi as this, just the basic pi symbol. Because, the Newtonian grain is in paradox state, split by the observer interference lattice, little g and wg, the phase disapparition of particle in transit, not dark energy, dark matter. wg, the pull force of black holes, both fighting over each other to fix this particle wherever it is, and the observer permeating it, sometimes hearing the tree make a sound, and subsequently it moves back and experiences disapparition again. More energy and matter from the same amount of energy and matter, with compound interest to this being the case. And the onion is never more than one thing. It just harmonically expands within the interdomain of the one thing. So harmonic expansion within a given construct domain. This harmonic expansion, up to 11, why that joke was funny, like E equals mc squared, base 10 maths only, and no harmonic expansion, denied to you, so you can't put the fields together, and so you can't see the observer domain and know its variance from the material fluxation, and you only have craft energy technologies piecemeal that don't violate the Fermi filter, like the Mercury reactor that's in the feed and been given to every friendly nation state and defense contractor and private of relevance in the known world to enable energy transference from oil and gas paradigm to Cinnabar Mercury paradigm. All right, so that's a good motion through the general fluid dynamic shape of the universe and all relevant logics surrounding. So we'll go back to what I was getting to with this. So for intelligence, to have a proper database for predictive analysis, I'm sure you want, you take the literal digits of pi up to this number, what impacts this, first 9 digits, only, right? The I chain, time wave 0 literal code. So you fuse a time wave 0 literal code with this only up to this layer and try to find an interference lattice between the I chain, time wave 0, and the literal up to this number of digits pi for a full general fluid dynamic lattice manifold for a proper time wave 0, where Terence McKenna was very close to, it's a very rudimentary when you look at it, but very ingenious. The guy's a fucking genius, just like Rupert Sheldrake, morphogenetic fields. That's everything. So we're talking about the observer domain. He's working within the reductionist nomenclature data set as best he can in the collegiate intelligentsia and, speech circuit. He's doing the best he can without saying anything outside the Fermi filter necessarily. And even so, his TED talk, downgraded or banned or whatever, because he said morphogenetic fields. He said the observer effect outside of E equals mc squared garbage. So, yep, that's everything I wanted to cover in this little talk. Have a good one.